Right, we see aeroplanes on the big screen, isn't that wonderful? Here's the Curtiss P40F, the Warhawk, and it's flown by Stu Goldspink today. One of the most popular aeroplanes in World War II. They made thousands of them. They fought in every single theatre of war, particularly in the North African desert, where I think the sand wore them out pretty quickly. But the Curtiss P40 was famous for its turning ability. Then the beautiful MH434, the Mark 9 Spitfire, that's been at every revival since 1998. And Steve Jones is flying MH434, did a wonderful display on Thursday after the cricket match. It's the most original Spitfire. It's never had a total rebuild. Of course, it's been maintained and overhauled and had a number of new engines. And we'll never forget the great Ray Hanna flying this airplane down the pit straight in 1998, below the level of the pits. Got his knuckles wrapped by the CAA, but they said, please don't do it again. So sadly he didn't. Mark 9 Spitfire fought in the war under Flight Lieutenant Lardner Burke, owned by Adrian Swire for a while, and then Swire sold it to Ray Hanna. Some people say it's the most famous warplane in the world, and that may be right. It's been a film star in lots of films. What a glorious shame. There's the P40F. That's the Merlin engine version of the Curtiss P40. There's a very shiny one in the Freddie March Spirit of Aviation Concours, which if you haven't seen yet, you must visit. Some lovely airplanes there. The original P40s had Allison engines. It was a good engine, nice, simple, easily maintained engine, but didn't have the power of the Merlin, particularly at high level. But the great strength of the P40 was low-level combat. It was only really threatened by the Italian Air Macchi, which was also a very agile aeroplane. I don't know if you've seen the wonderful P38 Lightning, which is in the Spirit of Aviation. We were hoping that Manfred Rietmann would be able to fly the Lightning, but it's not in the sky at the moment. So we're focusing on these two fabulous airplanes. Stu Goldspink told me yesterday he thought the P40 was just about his favorite airplane to fly. He even prefers it to the Spitfire, which not many people say. Third airplane up in the sky at the moment, the fabulous Transport Corsair, this one built by the Goodyear Company. It was designed for carrier operations in the American Navy, which is why it has that inverted gull wing shape, because it's got a huge engine, 18-cylinder engine, and a massive 13-foot propeller. And the difficulty was keeping the propeller off the deck. So they had that inverted gull wing so that with a relatively short undercarriage, they could keep the propeller clear of the deck. To begin with, the US Navy didn't like it because it had a rather bouncy undercarriage, and it tended to hop over the wires on the aircraft carrier. But the Royal Navy sorted it out, changed the suspension of the undercarriage, also closed the flap, the cooling flap on top of the engine cover, which was letting a bit of oil onto the windscreen, sorted it out. And when the US Navy saw the Royal Navy able to fly it onto much shorter carriers than they had, they said, okay, we'll do it. Prior to that, the US Marines flew the Corsair with great success, and indeed it flew in the Korean War, flew up until the mid-50s. Great big 2,000 horsepower, 18-cylinder radial engine in front. And Stu Goldspink also flies this aircraft. It's being actually flown today by Alan Wade. And Stu says, despite it being a great big heavy aircraft, actually on the controls it's very light and nice to fly. Here's Miss Helen. Miss Helen is the locally based Mustang, P51 Mustang. We've seen the Ferocious Frankie many years. Miss Helen was found by Rob's Lamplugh in a kibbutz in Israel, sort of being played with by the kids, rescued it, and that was in 1976. And 11 years later, it did its first flight after restoration. It starred in the film Memphis Belle. Look at it, that lovely shape, the amazing Mustang, which was developed very, very quickly as a very long-range fighter to accompany the bombers on their 8-hour trips. It has an 8-hour endurance. On the way, it used to be equipped with wing tanks made of compressed cardboard, which they released pretty much over the Netherlands on their way. And so a number of Dutch people were surprised to have a cardboard fuel tank landing in their garden. But it gave great comfort to the bomber crews to be accompanied by what they called their little friend. Not so little. And the Mustang initially had the Allison engine, wasn't terribly successful. Finally, look at that. This is the only P38 Lightning in Europe. Belongs, as you can see, to the Red Bull aircraft at Salzburg, Hangar 7. Flown here by Manfred Riedmann. Had a lovely time flying it here. Had to fly at fairly low level because of headwinds. And when the air traffic control said, "What sort of airplane are you flying?" he was delighted to say P38 Lightning. And they said, "What?" They didn't believe him. And a lot of the airfields on the way said, "Manfred, please come and do a low pass over our airfield." And he was pleased, actually happy to do that. Amazing design. Twin Allison engines, twin boom. The only well, there were various problems initially with the Lightning. At very high speed, it tended to tuck itself into a dive, and at high speed, of course, the controls were so heavy the poor old pilot couldn't pull the stick back, and they lost a few prototypes. But finally, one test pilot who got into this dive right up at about 30,000 feet, when he was down in thicker air at about 5,000 feet, he was able, by winding the trim control back, to finally pull out of the dive, but probably his hands were shaking a bit by the end of that. The other problem with the Lightning was the ventilation and heating in the cockpit, because it's quite far away from the heat of the engines. It was very successful in the Far East, where the guys used to fly it in their shirt sleeves, or even not with a shirt at all because it was so hot in the cockpit. When it was flown in the winter in Europe, it was so cold that the poor old pilots' hands froze. They tried to equip them with the electric heated suits, but they weren't very successful. So it didn't have a great reputation in Europe. But interestingly, a squadron of P38 Lightnings were based here at West Hampstead towards the end of the war. Miss Helen lands. Since the tragedy at Shoreham a couple of years ago, flying here doesn't involve extreme aerobatics, but it gives us a chance to see these glorious aircraft doing an oval pattern around Goodwood, and for us to have lots of time to admire such unusual shapes in the sky. I've never seen a P38 flying before. Two Allison engines again. And Stu Goldspink, comparing the Allison with the Merlin engine, told me this yesterday morning, that the Allison has half as many moving parts as the Merlin. So it's a very easily maintained, reliable engine, gave reasonable power, but not in the early days of the Mustang, didn't have the power to get it up to the very high levels. And the Mustang was really transferred when it was finally fitted with the Merlin. Two big air intakes at the end of the engine nacelle. Can you see them? Feeding cooling air to the engine. One intriguing thing about the Lightning, well, there are so many intriguing things, but normally if you lose an engine on takeoff, which is not a fun thing to do, you ram the other engine, the surviving engine, into full power to maintain height. With the Lightning, that is fatal, because the working engine pulls you right round into a dive, and on the pilot's notes for the Lightning, there's a very, very strict rule that if you lose an engine on takeoff, what you must do is throttle back the surviving engine so that the thing continues just about to climb, but to go straight ahead. And Manfred told me on Friday that that requires great discipline by the pilot, and to remember it's all instinct. If you lose an engine, the instinct is to ram on as much power as you can, but don't do it in a Lightning.
Okay, that's lovely. This